I'm Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact. President Trump is getting some bipartisan support for his campaign promise of congressional term limits. A lot of lawmakers agree with him, and at least a dozen bills are circulating in Congress right now, sponsored by Republicans and Democrats, including one from a group of younger lawmakers, 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, who want to implement term limits of 12 years for members of the House and Senate. Democrat Patrick Leahy of Vermont is the nation's longest-serving senator. He was elected in 1975. And Republican Don Young of Alaska is the longest-serving representative, elected in 1973. Any bill implementing term limits would require a constitutional amendment. Ro Khanna is a Democratic congressman from California. Jody Arrington is a Republican congressman from Texas. They're both freshman congressmen and both support term limits. Nice to have you both with me.
Great to be with you.
So let's kick it off with why. Why are term limits so important?
Our founders never intended for people to get elected, citizens of our country, and make a career out of politics. I think the idea was that we would send our fellow citizens as citizen legislators to go and govern and to solve the problems of the day, and then come back home and live under the laws that they passed. And so we've gotten far from that notion. People are sick and tired of politics as usual in this country. And more than just tax code reform or health care reform or fill in the blank with your most important policy issue, they want congressional reform.
But isn't congressional reform, couldn't that also be like vote in your election? Hey, I have an opportunity for you to oust people who've been in for a long time. Vote against them. Vote in the new person.
Well, I think we need more people voting, but one of the reasons people don't vote is incumbents have such an advantage. The re-election rate of incumbent members of Congress is 98%. And what term limits will do is have many more competitive elections, because you're going to have much more turnover in these seats. People are going to actually have choice. And I think that's what really gets people out to vote. We respect people's service, but every generation deserves a chance to lead, to have their voice. And that's why I so admire Jody, who really pulled us together on this term limits in a bipartisan way. And we've made great progress.
I think what's lacking as much as anything is the courage and the political will to do some things that may not be popular back home. We desperately want to do more than rearrange the furniture up here. We want to change the game. We want to change the culture. And we want to give our kids the hope and optimism of a country that can govern, solve problems, and move forward.
Who do you think's been in too long? Who do you think has been in too long?
I think it would require me to judge their body of work. Here's the thing. There are people, like I said, who've stayed over the 12-year term limit that we would place on ourselves in every class thereafter, who have done a fine job and have not gotten caught up or sucked into the vortex of the swamp. And there are those who have. I just don't think that the system and the incentives are healthy. I think we're asking for people to be supermen and superwomen in terms of rising above the pushes and pulls of this broken culture.
Who do you think has been there too long?
Dianne Feinstein. I endorsed against her. I endorsed Kevin DeLeon. I said we need new ideas, new energy. I respect Senator Feinstein's service to our state and our country. People said, well, wow, this freshman member of Congress is coming in and endorsing against the incumbent senator. But I came to Washington to shake things up. And it's not that I don't respect Senator Feinstein on a whole host of issues, but I think a state like California needs new voices. But I agree with Jody. I don't think it's personal to individuals. It's about going back to our founders. And I think they would be shocked if people were in these jobs for 20, 30 years. That's not what they had in mind.
So let's say it does not pass. Would you both be out in 12 years, say, listen, I'm going to self-correct the system as an individual, and I'm done in 12 years?
Let me start.
Congressman, that's a yes or no question.
Well, I'd say no, because if I term limit myself and nobody else is turning over, all I do is set rural America, the ag and energy producers, and the people I represent in a competitive disadvantage. I think it has to be across the board.
How about you?
Well, I agree with Jody. I mean, I'm sure Jody's the same way with his wife. I've got to get her permission every term to run for re-election. So who knows 12 years from now. I don't think the solution is getting individuals to say we're not going to run. They make for a good campaign slogan. It's much more how do we structurally change the rules.
Ro Khanna and Jody Arrington, nice to have you guys. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.